Hello, everybody, and welcome to Microsoft's webinar series. We have another exciting edition today. Today, we're going to talk about enterprise resource management, the essential steps to managing resources. My name is Mike Otranto, and I'm a strategic account specialist at Microsoft. I'm also joined on today's webcast with Jim Patterson, who leads in the business development role. Today, the line will not be open for questions, but feel free to use the chat feature, or you can email us directly, and we'll be happy to answer your questions that way. We'll be including our contact information at the end of the webinar. If for some reason you get distracted or pulled away during the webinar, no need to worry. I will be emailing the recording and the slide deck of today's presentation. I will now hand off the webcast to Jim Patterson. Jim?
Thanks, Mike. Much appreciated. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time with us today. Today, we'll be talking about enterprise resource management and some of the components around that. Topic areas that we're going to cover today are some of the challenges that resource management brings to organizations in the current landscape. We'll talk about some concepts of the resource management process. We'll also talk resource management tools, ones that people are typically using today, as well as tools that are available and ones that we're going to show you today to enlighten you and show you that there's alternate and maybe even enhanced ways to deal with your resource management challenges. We'll talk about resource management specifically in Microsoft Project Online and a lot of the things that Microsoft's doing for folks around that as well. We'll then focus on a demonstration to show you some of these technologies in action, and then we'll wrap up with a summary, some next steps, and potentially answer some questions, time permitting. And then we'll have some special offers for those of you who have registered for the webinar today. So with that, let's get started.
Muted.
I want to get down to the 101 level of resource management. And you look at the kind of Wikipedia type of definition of resource management. It defines resource management as the efficient and effective deployment and allocation of an organization's resources when and where they are needed. That's pretty generic, pretty high level. But how does it really apply itself in the context of project and portfolio management and enterprise resource management for the enterprise? Well, the benefits of actually tackling resource management or trying to get a handle or harnessing that is a few things. One is a challenge that people have is a lack of resource visibility because things are often disjointed, different systems, siloed organizational structures, and other aspects that create some barriers. Sometimes resource visibility in a complete fashion is very difficult for organizations. By tackling enterprise-wide resource management, resource visibility becomes something as a benefit or an output of all that. Increasing business value. In the definition on the left-hand side, it talks about when and where they are needed, but what about having them working on the right things? Allocating resources to the highest value and highest return efforts or initiatives within our organization is going to increase business value to make sure that we're working on the right things that add to the bottom line or enhance the prestige or market position of a particular organization. Saving time and money. If we do not have a cohesive process that is a little more holistic, oftentimes the disjointed use of resources in a piecemeal fashion can waste resources or have them deployed or even execute in a very inefficient fashion. Also, not having the right resources or resources on that fit within the cost structure of what we've been given, say, for a budget or for a contract by a customer can help or hinder our ability to be profitable in what we're doing in our project and resource management endeavors. By doing resource management in a structured way and in a way that makes sense for your organization will then increase project success rates. The ability to deliver on time, within budget, and with the right scope and capabilities are all dimensions, not to mention quality of a project. And if we can get a handle on this and use our resources effectively, we can definitely increase many of those dimensions or other legs of that triangle that define project success for your organization. And then to be able to accommodate demand. You know, most organizations today are getting demand for requests for projects and work efforts that far outstrip their capacities within the organizations. And the ability to accommodate demand for the right things and be able to make sure that we're being thoughtful in the way we allocate resources or in the way we make commitments, knowing full well what our capacity or our bandwidth is before we make those commitments, are things that are very important to drive success rate and customer satisfaction. And customer satisfaction, in most cases, whether it be internal or external, is the primary driver for why we're doing anything we're doing in our organizations. And then there's the employee satisfaction piece. If we are more ad hoc in our resource management and we don't take a holistic approach, we tend to over-allocate, use, and I would say even many times abuse our resources with unrealistic workloads and unrealistic demands and commitments. Employee satisfaction there can be impacted to the fact that they could be frustrated and confused, and morale can actually dip if we don't get a handle on this, and ultimately, in the worst case, can lead to high turnover. So these are benefits that tackling resource management as a discipline can have for an organization if we do this correctly. So some of the resource management challenges, though, that organizations are facing and why it's sometimes difficult to harness all this is, these are just some of them. You know, resource ownership. Depending on your organizational structure, whether or not you're a projectized organization, maybe a matrixed organization with functional and resource organizations, or whether you're more flat organizations, usually resources are assigned to different management, different groups within organizations, and then the ability to get those resources on a timely basis really is a matter of byplay between those different silos. Sometimes getting the resource at the right time can be a challenge, or getting the right resource that you might need can be a challenge as well. So resource ownership can provide challenges or complexities that we need to tackle, and visibility can help with that. From a resource focus perspective, we have resource demands coming at us from all different directions. It could be different parts of the organization. It can be through different systems or spreadsheets, internal initiatives versus customer-facing initiatives, or more product-driven, market-driven types of things. And we get all those things, and actually working on those and task switching between those, as well as not fully understanding what the right priorities is and what the things we should be working on first from an overall organization perspective, can actually lead to inefficiency by that lack of focus. And then non-project workload. A lot of folks allocate resources to projects as if they're 100% dedicated to their projects. That is generally a fallacy. Resources have other demands, whether it be just administrative or organizational internal needs, or whether it's non-project workload by things like operational work, you know, break fix and incidents and service requests. The idea is if we're not factoring in the proper workload factor that people are otherwise committed to outside of projects, it can really impact our delivery of projects according to the commitments that we're making. And then from a resource tracking perspective, the ability for people to not only plan capacity, then allocate resources to initiatives and work, and then track where people really are spending their time to see if we're actually burning or allocating those resources or expending those resources in the way we thought. That resource tracking, if we're not looking at all dimensions of that, can give us misleading pictures of where we're really at and whether or not we are going to succeed, or where course corrections might be needed. We talked about resource visibility earlier, and if you don't have visibility into what the plan is, or what things are actually transpiring once we begin to execute, it's very difficult to assess where we're at and adjust as needed, and do it in a timely fashion where we might still be able to have some impact and to correct any issues that we might have. And also, if we have a myriad of disconnected systems, spreadsheets, and tools around an organization, the reporting in organizations on a resource management perspective to look at a holistic headcount plan and capacity plan becomes a manual, or at a best a semi-manual process for folks. It in essence becomes a major project in and of itself each reporting period as we try to get our handle on that. If we use a thoughtful and holistic and comprehensive resource management approach and use tools that are designed for that purpose, we can actually get to a point where the resource management reporting becomes a natural output of the process, to where by working the process and keeping our data current, the reporting itself should flow as a natural output of doing that work. And then the too much information piece. I mean, I may be asked to put in resource plans and forecasts and percent completes and progress. I might be asked to put in narrative type of information on what it is I've accomplished or challenges I've had. I might be asked to do a timesheet. I might and be asked to provide email updates or provide things that as I get polled around a conference room table. And the idea of having all these different data points, all these different sources, and all these different tools to feed becomes overload, not only for the resources that are providing the updates on that work, but the people who are trying to plan and manage those resources effectively across the organization. So these are just some of the more common resource management challenges we see with the customers that we work with. And if we look at resource management steps, we talk about, different dimensions, or let's just say even progressions as people get better and tackle different aspects of the resource management continuum. The first thing people tend to start with is overall capacity planning. They do that because it's high level. It's really kind of trying to figure out, usually on an FTE basis or full-time equivalent basis or headcount basis, what we need at a project or an initiative level, keeping it really high level so that we can at least forecast what the demand is for different resource types within that organization and how that fits within our ability or the roster of resources that we have within our organization. When we then go into resource allocation, we're talking about then taking a more detailed approach to, once we say, hey, you can have this resource for a particular initiative or project, we then start to allocate them across specific work elements or tasks within that project. So we have more detailed or more tactical resource plans. And the reason that comes second after capacity planning is the discipline required to do the detailed planning is something that some organizations are not yet ready to tackle or tackle effectively or accurately when they first get started. And then the resource allocation really is a planning function. And the resource tracking then becomes, okay, where are we actually burning resources? Where are the resources really spending their time? And what are those resources accomplishing for that time spent? That becomes another level of discipline that typically includes some type of progress tracking as well as time reporting for actuals so that we can compare plan versus actual and understand any variances that we might have. And then as we start to mature, team management is really about team dynamics. It's about teams pulling together and becoming more effective in working as a group. So instead of being an aggregation of multiple people working individually, achieving synergies and becoming more effective and getting more velocity in the work that they're doing so that we become more effective with those teams as they do more and more work together. And then overall work management, that really becomes a factor of just incorporating all work. Not just project work, but basically looking at all types of work that are in the organization. It could be administrative work. It could be project direct work. It could be operational work like incidents or break fix types of things. The idea is we look at it from an overall work management perspective and try to put it in the context so that the individual resource that gets assigned pieces from the overall work management process have some sense of order and understanding of the organization's priorities and be able to tackle these things in a way that's not frustrating nor cumbersome. And if we look at resource management maturity, I mean, to go through those steps and get started with those components that we just talked about, it's really helpful to understand the resource management maturity of our organization. And it's really important that we're honest with ourselves when we assess ourselves as far as where we're at. So we tackle something or we embark upon something that we can sustain today. We ultimately want to stretch the organization towards incremental improvement, but we don't want to stretch or the organization to the extent where they can't deliver and where they can't make it work, because otherwise it'll just fall apart on us. And the idea is we want to build a roadmap where we can actually tackle the pieces that we want to get to and get on the road to that continuous improvement. If we think about resource management maturity inventions, we have to think about the planning and tracking and granularity. Do we want to do high-level capacity planning, or are we going to do more tactical, task-based types of things? Do we want to plan by generic roles of the types of resources we need, or do we want named individual resources specifically assigned to different pieces of work? Do we want to track costs around resources? Are our resources going to have inherent costs of a cost per use or a cost per unit or a cost per hour? And the idea is track that so that we can get a resultant cost of our projects and our resource endeavors based upon the resource planning and execution that we have. Are we just going to forecast resources? Be basically planning and looking ahead and keep adjusting that forecast so we have a rolling picture of what it is we think we're going to be doing? Or do we want to tackle that and actually compare that with actuals that we're capturing from the feet that are on the ground, the people that are actually closest to the work, and actually collect things like timesheets so that we can actually see what the burn and what we're actually spending time on, and comparing that against what we thought we were going to do by the forecast. Once again, a progression of maturity. Are we going to do governance and prioritization? Are we going to have an intake process that, as we think about different work elements, projects or initiatives, are we going to have an intake and approval process where we prioritize and assess, and then do some maybe advanced high-level planning on the resources that are required, but then only do detailed planning on the things that we actually decide to work on, or the things that we decide are going to make the short list to what we're seriously going to consider doing. And then in a matrixed organization or a siloed organization, you may end up with a resource approval or negotiation process. It may not be the purview of one person to decide what resources are going to be on my project and what tasks I'm going to put them on. You may have to go through a negotiation process with different organizational entities. For example, the most common one I see is project organizations or project management organizations that have to negotiate with the functional organization or the resource-driven organization so that we ultimately meet the requirements and get assigned the resources that we need who can actually fulfill on those requirements. So just some things to consider on the maturity side of things, because not everybody's going to tackle this and start it from the same place. If we look at what the Gardner Group says about maturity, this is just kind of picture some of the things that we're talking about. If we look at a maturity level 2, for example, notice that in the red nodes in the maturity level 2 column, that it really starts with mostly high-level capacity planning. And the detailed resource allocation says we're only going to start projects that we define from a capacity planning or high-level perspective that can be resourced. So we have a general idea that we have the resources to do it, but we may not do real detailed or rigorous detailed resource allocation in our project planning. Now, as we move to maturity level 3, notice that the green boxes, the green nodes, become more prevalent. And we start moving from FTEs to more named resources. We look at skills, we look at assignments and durations, and we can even go from a soft booking to a hard booking of resources and those things. And notice that more detailed resource allocation comes in. And then when we get up to maturity level 4, notice it's the team formation and the more team dynamics piece that comes into play, as well as increases in personal productivity, as well as the resource management or human resource management side of things. So the idea is that start at a place that makes sense for you as an organization. Now, the resource management must. I'll reiterate that assess your own readiness. Be honest with yourselves as far as where you're at, where you're starting from, and what are those easier incremental wins to get this process started. And then overall, understand the overall organizational maturity. Where are you at from a project and portfolio and resource management maturity perspective? And that may vary depending on which parts of the organization. So different parts of your organization can be more mature or more ready than others. But if you're doing this on an enterprise basis, you probably want to split that line a little bit so that we can get success. And maybe it's not everything the more mature folks want day one, but maybe it's a stretch for the folks that are less mature. And then we can pull together as an organization or as an enterprise to move towards more robust resource management maturity. And also understand the environment you have. I mean, what you put in place really has to factor in your culture, your organizational dynamics, your power structures, and the industries that you're in and the ways that you do work. So everything that you do as you build this should be tempered by the realities of what you're facing and the constraints that you may have based upon your environment. And then once you do those first 3 things, I think it's important that you build a resource management roadmap. I think everybody should strive to get to the most mature situation they possibly can. But that roadmap might be a series of steps of what we tackle now and how long we'll do that. Well, maybe what the next incremental step would be, say, 6 months or 12 months from now, or beyond that, as you go through, ultimately getting to the highest level of resource management maturity that your organization can achieve. Now, that being said, we're going to talk a lot about tools today. But it's important that you define your process first. I think a mistake people make sometimes is they They think that the silver bullet is a tool or a solution from a technology perspective that will just resolve all problems. But it's really more effective if you define a process, and then in today's modern solutions, then configure a solution or a tool to automate that process rather than you trying to fit to some tool that has constraints or limitations. So something that's flexible and that can achieve the things that you want to do is something that should be very important and on your radar. So where are people starting today? Well, how are organizations managing resources today? And I would have to say that before people put an enterprise resource management structure and approach in place, the predominant thing we see out there is people are using Microsoft Excel. And a lot of times it's not even as sophisticated as this tool in here that shows graphical bars within the cells in Microsoft Excel. It just could be a cell by cell headcount plan or hours plan over time, understanding where your resources are. Now, why do people do this? Well, one, because almost everybody has it on their desktop and it's a tool people know how to use for other purposes, and they now just provision it and use it for just another purpose in the resource management side of things. Most of us in a business setting know how to use it to some degree, and some people are actually power users within an organization. And it's easy to mail around or share on a file share files so that people can open those up and take a look at what it is. So those are some of the reasons why people do it today. It's accessible, it's easy, and people know it. Now, when you use it though, everything is manually updated, and we're talking cell by cell, row by row, and sometimes if they're complex and there's large amounts of resources, by the time you finish putting together the model is already outdated because resource management needs, delays in projects, availability of resources change on a fairly fluid basis. And it provides, a very static model that has to be updated in a labor-intensive way. It also provides the inability to summarize resources across multiple projects very easily, and sometimes requires, say, multiple tabs to manage different resource forecasts, different groups, et cetera, in order to make those things happen. So there are definitely constraints. It is a static model, and it's not designed to be fluid and move as projects and resource pools move. So the problem with Excel is the lack of standards, since oftentimes organizations have a variety of different models that people are using, making it very difficult to aggregate that type of information. We talked about it being a manual and static model. There's no visibility of your overall resource capacity that's inherent into an Excel model. It can be very time consuming to do this cell by cell and row by row. Just visibility insight isn't ideal. It doesn't really factor into an overall governance process, so it's generally not tied to your overall intake of projects and initiatives and the requirements therein. It doesn't become necessarily a factor that's figured into that data set. Also, other things that you might need in an execution of resource management, things that might require documents, risks, issues, et cetera, that are associated with what these resources are working on, is not really part of that Excel model. And it would be difficult to make that part of that same model and have it be dynamically linked to all of that. And just strategic alignment to project to company objectives. How do we make this work in a fashion to where we're working on, as I said earlier on, the right things or the highest value things for the organization? And you could probably come up from 9 and on with other things that you're running into as far as limitations or frustrations in just doing these things in Excel by itself. So if we look at how we're going to transform the resource management landscape and look at transformative options, what are some of those things? Well, one is we should have a solution that has our processes embedded in it, whether it be a workflow, whether it be negotiation, whether it be just the entire aspects of data points that we need in our resource management process, to basically have those embedded into the solution rather than having them outside of the solution or outside of the spreadsheet like we talked about, is something that is a great advance for many organizations. Having a centralized data repository of which the resource management information for the enterprise is just one component of just an overall rich set of data is something that provides great value, to where the resource management piece is just one component or one factor that we're looking at when we're looking at the effectiveness of managing projects, initiatives, and work. And then having actionable intelligence. We're talking about reporting and dashboards and analytics that become a natural output of this process because we have a central repository of data. Be able to have that easily without having to have highly manual mashups of data and then people manually creating charts or PowerPoints, whatever that might be. And how do we do that? Well, we do it today using Microsoft's Project Online. It provides a very solid platform for portfolio management, project management, and I've highlighted in red here the resource management component, as well as all the project collaboration around that. So where the portfolio management really has the demand management and governance processes built into the solution, the project management for executing schedules, issues, and risks, and project-related reports. Project Online also provides the ability to do that high-level capacity planning we talked about in those resource management steps, to do detailed resource assignments to tactical tasks if you want to do that, and the ability to do timesheets for capturing actuals in a very detailed fashion so we can actually see what we're actually executing or where we're actually spending our time. And then all the different project collaboration pieces that are available in Project Online because it's part of the Office 365 suite of products. So if we think about Project Online being an end-to-end solution that, though licensed separately, once it's enabled, becomes part of your Office 365 experience. It provides the ability to use all the other productivity tools in Office 365 now in a project management, resource management context. And the idea of the synergies there, the familiarity of that makes it easy to deploy or adopt. And then because Microsoft takes care of the infrastructure in that Office 365 cloud, and so many organizations have already adopted that, it really is just an incremental add for folks, and Microsoft now takes care of that without you having to put an infrastructure or a server farm in place in order to put a solution in, like we used to do in the past with Microsoft Project Server. So all resource work, we can look at what we call resource engagements, or that high-level forecast or capacity plan. Plus, we can look at, for projects in flight, we can look at detailed schedules and detailed allocations and look at a total resource requirement for all work elements that are actually identified within the system. And if we look at just overall resource management capabilities, we have a centralized resource pool, which we'll talk about in the demonstration. We have the ability to do high-level capacity plans, or what they call resource engagements, to do more FTE-based high-level planning. We have timesheet capabilities. We have the more familiar detailed resource allocations that people do in Microsoft Project Schedules today, which is also available in addition to all these additional things that we get with this more enterprise solution, as well as dashboards and reporting, and we'll show different avenues on that today regarding ways to visualize this information and understand the totality of what it is we're planning and tracking. And the other piece that's here is the ability to do optimization and do scenarios. Project Online can leverage our resource planning so we can see what can we really do, or how much can we actually do or commit to based upon the resource constraints that we have. It's not enough to say that we have the dollars to do it from a budget perspective. We actually have to have the actual bodies and the resources needed to get it done. And by doing these types of analyses, we can see where our shortfalls are, what we would need to hire, or what projects we should not select based upon prioritization. So these are things that are all part of the mix that you don't necessarily get in a spreadsheet model. And then if we look at this, the typical use cases we have project managers making requests for resource types, and then resource managers reviewing those, look at the resources they're responsible for, and then basically telling the project organization or the project manager, this is who we can give you for this time frame for this initiative. Now, simplified without negotiation, you could actually have a central place where one person actually creates and communicates that resource plan, and then the people who execute on those projects or initiatives can work on those. This is just two particular use cases if you want to think about it, but they can all be accommodated within the solution we're going to show you today. So with that, let's get to an overall demonstration. So here, I'm looking at Microsoft Project Online. And as I mentioned, I'm looking at a project center here, which is a portfolio or a list of all the projects that we're managing in this solution. Notice that it's part of the Office 365 solution. It becomes a component just like any other application in Office 365. It becomes available to us. And the idea here, it's part of a familiar environment that your users can work with. So the Project Center here allows you to look at your projects, have an intake put them through a flow or process on project requests, get things approved in a process that makes sense for you. And then here, showing it grouped or organized by life cycle stages, and then ultimately getting to the projects that are in progress, gives us a place to organize and have a central repository for this type of work. So we have plenty of other webinars that we've recorded on the overall effectiveness of managing your portfolios and the overall effectiveness of using Project Online, but our focus on resource management today is really where we want to be. Now, what makes this different than using, say, Microsoft Project on the desktop or using your Excel spreadsheets is the ability to have a centralized resource pool. So our resource center allows us, and this can be built from your Active Directory on an automated basis, but the idea is that you can then have a centralized pool of resources from which you would choose to allocate to different projects and initiatives, as well as to specific work elements within those projects and initiatives. You can actually use metadata to describe these any way you like. In this example, I've got these resources grouped in this particular view by their role, but we can also track things like their department or who their manager is or what their location is or what their skill sets are. The idea is you're only really limited by your imagination because of the configurability of this. And then say, for example, I'm the manager who's responsible for managing the ranks of these business analysts. I can focus on these and actually focus on those resources and their constraints and their challenges and the things that I need to provide to the project organizations for those particular types of resources. So that being said, if I go into the projects themselves and I wanted to look at a traditional way we might look at a project, I can actually drill into a specific project, and let's just say I wanted to pick the iOS app for Metro Transit Authority. And I said, I want to open this, and I can either open it up in Microsoft Project on the desktop, but what's nice about Project Online is I can also choose to open it up in the browser. And by doing so, I can easily communicate to others in the organization via whatever permissions or rights I've given people to basically communicate the overall schedule to other people in the organization. Now here I'm looking at a high-level timeline that has the key phases or deliverables up here, so I can, without looking at the gory details of the schedule, get an idea what the overall timeline is. But notice down below here, a very familiar looking Microsoft project-like view, which includes resource assignments. And notice it's a combination of named individuals, but in some case I still have generic assignments in here, which tells me that I have yet to put a name to who this business analyst should be on this particular project. I can also do the same things in Project Professional. So as I go into Project Professional, I can go and look at a Gantt chart here, and I notice I can work with this same project plan here. The only difference being, instead of saving this to a file, today in the Project Online environment, I'm doing a save and publish function, which actually publishes it and makes it available via the browser so that anybody I've given access to and permissions can then view these things as we go on through. Now, the detailed assignments, most people are used to the idea in Microsoft Project how to assign resources right within a Microsoft Project plan. So we're not going to focus on that today. That's been around for decades as far as how to do all that within Microsoft Project. That capability still exists, okay? Some of the things that we add once we go to Microsoft Project Online and once we use Project Professional or we use the web browser, Project Web Access, we can then start doing things like overall resource plans. Say, for example, we want to use a more high-level resource planning very early on in the cycle before a project is actually approved. We can actually do high-level types of resource allocation here, meaning long before I have a schedule thought out, long before I have detailed tasks, I can say in general, I need a business analyst to analyze business requirements and benefits in general on this particular project. And I can establish what they call is an engagement. And that engagement, all I really have to establish is the from and to, and notice in this case, it's several months that I have this. And I can say, do I want them 100% of the time? Do I want them 50% of the time? Or do I want something in between? Or do I want to do this in work units, saying I have a certain amount of hours that I'd like to allocate this across this time span? The idea is if I pick the units and pick the percentages, it'll automatically calculate the work that translates into. So we'd find that most people actually use that type of aspect on the percentages and let the system do some work for you. You can also put some comments in here, because this resource engagement can also, as we'll show in a bit, serve as a resource request. And so the idea is, if I'm a project manager really building out the needs of this project, or a subject matter expert, it will actually go as a resource request to the functional manager to say, I need a business analyst over this time and to this degree. Who can I have? And they can assess the best people that I would have for those, and how to edit and try to add those things as we go on through. Now, in general, we can get more granular if you like. So for example, if I only needed 50% of a business analyst initially, I could actually ramp in with 50 and finish up with that and change the values and stagger that a little bit more like a spreadsheet in this. The idea though is I don't have to, but the idea is I can do this at a very high level type of FTE based capacity plan, okay? Now, if I go back to the web browser and I go back to the resource center where we had our centralized resource pool, I can actually now go and I can actually go look at the resource requests here. And the resource requests, if I'm just focusing on the business analysts, would include ones that have been committed already and ones like I just had in there for the iOS app for Metro Transit Authority. I have a proposed resource request for a certain time frame, and it's right now a generic business analyst that I have that's needed. Now, as a functional manager or the resource manager who would get an email, if we have email notifications turned on, would come here and say, okay, somebody has a need for one of my business analysts. And I can select that request, right? And then I could actually go in here, look at the capacity of my business analyst organization. And I can see out of my team, I can see there's certain people I definitely don't want to assign to this. But I also see that people like Yukari actually doesn't have any work here and would actually need, would be an ideal person for me to assign that person to. So as I go back to the resource requests here, I could very easily go in and take a look as a functional manager, and I can say, you know, I'm going to make Yukari the business analyst on this particular piece. And at that point, I'll accept the fact that I've done that, and that will send a notification to the project manager that they've been given Yukari for their particular project to whatever degree or percentage that they've been allocated. And then that project manager can then, within that constraint, start assigning that resource to tasks within that particular project. The idea is it provides a negotiation process such that functional and project organizations can work together to make those things happen. Now, some people do a combination of these things in more of a rolling wave process. That rolling wave might be you use generic resources very early as we're formulating the project and we're deciding whether or not to work on it. And then as we go through the project process, as we get into near term, let's say, for example, the next 30 days, we want to make sure that any generic business analyst assignments that we have on our projects over the next 30 days need to be resolved. And it triggers us to say, we shouldn't have generics this near term, and we need to replace those generics with specifics like Yukari here. And the idea by taking those things from a request or an idea or a proposed resource allocation to a more committed one that basically gets approved and made available to the project manager. Okay, so the combination of those detailed assignments and these high-level capacity plans really provides a resource profile of what it is that we're looking at. So as we're going on through and we look at overall capacity planning, if I go look at the overall resource pool, and I want to have different views right here within Project Online, and I'll still focus on the business analyst role. I could focus on any group of resources or any aggregation of resources here, but I could start looking at capacity planning from a number of different views. For example, in this case, I got the capacity heat map that we talked about, but instead of looking at those individually, maybe I want to look at things like just overall resource utilization, and I can look at a graph and see where we are in relation to our overall capacity of business analysts and some details down below that support that graph. I might want to look at, you know, the resource utilization by project, or as I'm looking to assess who I'm going to put on resource onto projects, I might want to look at remaining availability. And this is a nice view because where people are in the negative, notice that 0 is the middle line here. You can tell me very quickly by hovering over here who's in a negative position and who's already over allocated out of my ranks. And then you can just look at overall work by resource, et cetera. And you can go in and look at these areas and get an idea how allocate people are. And this becomes a natural output of the process, as opposed to a spreadsheet. As those resource plans change within the system for the individual projects, this aggregation and this picture is going to change dynamically, so that you can have your finger on the pulse on where you're at any one given point in time. Okay. Now, where this is helpful is in that kind of selection and optimization process. You know, we talked about the portfolio of projects, and we have certain proposed and in-flight projects. Now, the portfolio analysis piece allows us to optimize our portfolio and use resource availability and constraints as a constraining factor as to what we select. So, for example, let's just say I wanted to go into a scenario where we had a $5 million budget, and we've already selected a group of projects with our in-flight projects and proposed projects that we'd like to consider. Now, in this case, from a dollar perspective or a budget perspective of $5 million, it says out of the projects that we're considering, the projects we can only do 85% of the total value of our portfolio based upon the dollar value constraints that we have. And there's some projects that we wouldn't do based upon their prioritization and where they fit. But for today's purposes, when we're looking at the resource component, you know, even though we could do 85% of this based upon dollars, we may not have the physical resources, even though we have the dollars to do that. And given our current resource pool, it says that based on that constraint, I can only do 70% of these projects. And the ones that aren't selected are more, so we can only do 20 instead of the 24 that we could do just from a dollar perspective. Now, we could do a number of things here in a scenario. We could maybe stagger these and change the start date of the project so that we can maybe get more done today with more projects and get some more in and defer some projects maybe that are lower priority. And we can look at this from a requirements details perspective. So as we do our resource planning at a high level or our more detailed resource allocations, we could look at this and start looking at what's required and see what roles we have our constraints and what's going on red. So for each project, we can see an aggregation of a roll-up of the resource requirements we have, and we can see in those where the different allocations are. And from our planning basis, look at what's over-allocated and why it wasn't selected. So the over-allocation stuff that we have is that not selected. We get the degree to which we're over-allocated and where we're falling short. Now, that being said, there's a whole number of things we can do here. One of the slick things that is in here is the ability to say, well, you know, what if we hired some more resources? Meaning, what if we hired or we contracted additional people with those skill sets? What could we do? So let's just say in this hired resources, let's say I hire three more resources hypothetically in this scenario, and I recalculate this. It's going to calculate and says, you know, I can get another 7% almost done of my portfolio based upon 3 more resources. And there's projects that are in here now that weren't there before. I got 2 more projects I can squeeze into the mix. And if I want to look at the hired resources report, it will tell me based upon that what it's suggesting that I need or where I was deficient in order to make that scenario happen. And in this case, it's all developers. It says I need an additional developer on the new customer success program. And I also needed 2 developers on the Windows 7's compliance program. So the idea is I can use this from a hypothetical perspective, do as many different scenario iterations as I want, and then compare and look and see which is the best approach for me to take as I want to commit this to an overall portfolio. Now, from a Wickersoft perspective, we're adding some really unique capabilities in here to make the resource planning and capacity planning process more graphical and drag and drop in its nature. Fully integrated with Project Online, we provide some capabilities with our OnePlan tool to provide more graphical, interactive type of capacity planning. Say, for example, I was going to look at doing what we did with the engagements before, and we want to do that for social networking. And I want to open that up in OnePlan. It's fully integrated via the ribbon here and also in data synchronization as well. So if I open this up and want to look at what the resource capacity plan is for the social networking integration project, it's going to open up that plan for this particular project. And when I look at it, it's going to give me a combination of generics and named individuals potentially that are on this project. So notice, it's showing me in weeks. Well, I could actually do it in, say, months. I can group it in different ways. I can look at it in terms of hours, or I can look at it in terms of just FTE percentages. The idea is, and I can choose the view horizon that I want. And the cool part is here, I'm looking at different high-level resource planning for both named individuals and generic types like resources and testers. I can also, what's cool in here, instead of going back and forth to a capacity view, I can see what the requirements are here for this particular project. But if I wanted to look in context of where these resources are already allocated and to what degree, I can say show all work, and it will then change this and look at all other work that they're assigned to from a capacity planning perspective across the organization. And as we see, some of our resources are very well overtaxed at this point before we even give them yet another piece of work. So the idea is we get a lot of visibility here right from one place, and it's all fully integrated with Project Online. Now, as I go through here and I look at, say, I still have a generic tester that I have to put on a named individual onto this project, and I don't have, say, a tester available, but I have a business analyst that can do some good unit testing for us. The idea is I could actually take this test solution piece that's required, which was in a resource engagement at that high level we talked about earlier, and I can just drag and drop this to the actual named individual resource here, Patrick Sands, and it also now fits within his availability where he didn't have any work in that particular point in time. The idea is we get to do this type of drag and drop capability and then have it automatically populate the resource engagements, the overall capacity views in Project Online, and also makes this planning detail available for the portfolio analysis piece that we showed you earlier on as well. Also, what's nice about this is that we can get some collaboration. We can do things like request updates from our particular resources like Patrick Sands and actually have an email go to them that says I need status and completion status and a message narrative that we can interact on. And I can actually send that update request to these resources, and they'll get an email that allows them to very quickly and easily provide an update on this particular engagement or piece of work. The other piece that we can do here as well is we can look at the more resource capacity planning here from an overall perspective. So let's say, for example, I go into the centralized resource pool again, and I want to go in and look at this from an overall perspective in using the resource scheduler piece of OnePlan. This actually gets embedded right within the capabilities here. And now right in the detail pages associated with Project Online, I can now look at that overall OnePlan graphical view across all resources. And I can look at that across everything within the organization, and I can start looking at this in totality rather than just on an individual project basis like we looked at before. So in looking at that, we basically can get to a more comprehensive picture of everything in the organization. So for example, if I go in and now look at, say, Daniel Williams, it's going to give me a picture of the things he's working on across multiple projects. I can filter and group these things by different roles, by departments, by different projects, or whatever else it might be. And the idea is that I have the same graphical interaction that I had on an individual project basis. I have it more on a multi-project basis. So something you can explore as an enhancement. It really extends the capabilities and the user experience for what's innately in Project Online. Then the other piece is to use Power BI. One of the nice parts about doing this all in Project Online is there a native OData feed from Project Online to Power BI. And these Power BI reports become a natural output, like we talked about, to get you away from the concept of all manual reporting. So as I'm looking through the Power BI report, and I'm looking at a resource status report. One is I'm looking at an overall dashboard of capacity versus overall allocation or demand across these resources. And looking across the entire organization, I can see general percentage of availability. I can see work versus capacity. I can see how it's sliced by the type of work that we have. And over here on the right, I can actually see sorted down who are the most over allocated, in this case, over abused resources up top, down through where I start getting some availability that I can use going on through here where I'm not in the negative. And the idea here is that they're very interactive in the way we can use this. We can use filters up above here, so I could filter this down by departments or by roles or by individual resource names, or I can interactively go into the graph and say, let me just look at the business analyst here, and I can start looking at a business analyst chart here and getting information and numbers and metrics that are specific to that business analyst role here as well. Okay. You can also go down and get more detailed utilization type of information. So if we want more granular information or details around that, I can see what the numbers are for the work versus capacity and what remaining availability is. And I can also use the same type of filtering approaches in general filters up above, or interactively go into the stacked bar charts, or basically go into a particular person and just focus on, say, Amy, and get an idea of what her capacity planning is right down and just focus on her by interactively working with the chart. One view I really like in the reports when I'm starting to think about who I might want to put on yet another project that came down and be requested is a higher level availability piece. And what this does is it kind of gives me an idea in this view by role. Once again, it's filterable. And for example, as I was looking down and I was looking at things like the business analyst role, I can then drill down and I can look in and see who's available within this, and I can see who might have the availability in the time frames that we need. And I can actually drill down into that specific business analyst role, and I can start looking overall availabilities for the people within that business analyst role very quickly. So all very at my fingertips, different dimensions or different perspectives on that resource piece. And then we talked about the differences between capacity plans, detailed resource allocations, and actual, say, from timesheets. I can get that view all in one, and all those dimensions in one report. For example, I can look at the overall capacity plan that we put, which was really that high-level capacity plan that we did with engagements, and say this is at a high level what we thought we were going to do when we did our capacity planning. The blue bars or columns here represent what the allocations are based upon detailed schedule and allocations that we did. Notice in this case, and this is done purposely for demonstration purposes, but notice that our assumptions in the capacity plan were far outstripped by the realities of the detailed planning we did once we got into the individual projects. And then the gray represents what's coming in from the timesheets and what we're actually spending in that particular quarter as we go on through. And once again, as we look at these things, we can go interactive and start looking at the specific resources that actually charged actual work in this particular time frame as we go on through using these bars to actually provide more detailed data down below. And if we want to look at the overall resource engagements and roll-ups of that information at that high level, we can look at this here. These are actually grouped by portfolio right now and get more detailed metrics regarding the actual resource engagements. Or if we wanted to focus on the detailed assignments done within our Microsoft project schedules, we can get that level of detail as well. So the idea just initially is that there's all kinds of things you can do with these out-of-the-box reports provided by Microsoft, as well as things that you can do to modify these or enhance these yourself, since they're open to be modified and enhanced. Also, we can move this same concept over to timesheets. So as we're just tracking things like timesheet compliance, whether or not timesheets have gotten through the approval process, we can use the same type of reports to kind of notice where things are in their different timesheet states and approval process, look at the hours that are in. We could look at compliance to make sure that all the timesheets are flowing through, or if there's any bottlenecks that we need to know, or if we're having any issues on the approval process by approver. The idea here is that you can get a lot of rich information that's just fed to these reports based upon the timesheet information that's being managed and executed on within the process. So with that, let's go into a little bit of a summary and a wrap up. So hopefully what we're able to communicate you today is that resource management is definitely a critical success factor for just overall PPM success in an organization, or just even resource management success independent of PPM. And that approach and processes should be aligned with organizational readiness and maturity. As I said, be honest with ourselves of where we're at. High-level capacity planning is really a good place to start. More detailed resource allocation can follow as ready or as needed. And then Project Online really provides a great total end-to-end platform for all PPM capabilities, including all those dimensions of resource management we talked about. Now, you can start there, but there's some additional enhancements that Microsoft provides via OnePlan to provide a more enhanced visual user experience for planning and tracking of your resources. And OnePlan is fully integrated and embedded into Project Online, so it really is just a UI extension that allows you to do things in a little different fashion, and some folks say maybe even a little more simple fashion. But the idea is it's still leveraging the power of Project Online all the way through. If you'd like to talk to us more, a little bit about Wickersoft. We are a joint venture with Microsoft that was founded in 2002. We do have a global footprint. We provide all consulting, business applications like OnePlan and our reporting solutions that we have and other extensions. We provide managed services and staffing for people that want help to augment their staffs or would like us to manage some of this stuff for them. We are a triple gold certified Microsoft partner. Our focus is on project and portfolio management, collaboration and content, and cloud productivity are our 3 gold certifications. Only less than 1% of Microsoft partners have a triple gold certification. And if you think about us as a one-stop shop, as I said, for business applications and some IP and technology that we've developed to enhance these types of things so people get better at work and resource management, the consulting services to help you implement on that. And we also have education and training, not only training classes and services, but some training tools that are online that allow you to promote and get more effective at adopting these tools and solutions as you go on through. As I mentioned, we also provide staffing and managed services if you're interested in exploring with that as well. So we're a pretty full functional company here. We talked about today doing things in project and portfolio management, including the resource management pieces in Project and Project Online, but all the Microsoft Cloud technologies, whether it be Visual Studio, where we're doing a lot of work for people doing Agile management and scaled Agile, SharePoint, where we're doing a lot of digital workplace things that are really kind of cool for that can work together with Project Online, and even in Microsoft Dynamics 365, the Cloud Business Solutions platform, we're doing a lot of things for folks in that way as well. And the kind of cool thing is they all feed into Power BI and a lot of the visuals and analytics that we talked about already today. Just so you know, as far as next steps, if you liked or were intrigued by anything you saw today, our special offers is that we're happy to offer you a free diagnostic or assessment and roadmaps to talk to you about where you're at and what we think it might take for you to get into something like this to some degree. So we're happy to have that discussion with you on a no charge basis, as well as if you're serious about moving forward with something like this and want to get hands-on, we can provide you with a Wickersoft Chaperone Project Online trial so that you can get hands-on and try out the things that you saw today. So you can contact us to do that as well. Or if you're not ready to do that yet, I gave you a very high-level generalized demo of some capabilities on the resource management side of things, but there's more capabilities to that as well. If you'd like a personalized one-on-one demo for your organization that drills into the things that are specific to your requirements, we're happy to schedule that with you. You can reach us at contactus@wickersoft.com. We have websites, which is us.wickersoft.com for our general purpose. We also have a specialized Project Online site called project-online.com, and it has an extension /OnePlan for more information on OnePlan. And we do these webinars all the time. We have a Tech Tuesday that has an overall Project Online webinar every Tuesday that you can sign up for. We have on-demand recorded webinars that we've done over the years that you can actually look at the recordings anytime you like. This one today will be the next iteration that gets up there in the on-demand. And if we have any upcoming webinars scheduled, they're up there as well so that you can find them at uswickersoft.com/webinars and actually register for them there. I think, Victoria, are there any questions out there that remain unanswered?
I answered quite a few, but I did have a question because I wasn't sure about our current configuration for OnePlan. So is OnePlan showing the data from the resource plan? Is it proposed committed, or is it pulling from the project schedule?
It is the resource scheduling piece that we showed you today is actually dovetailed with the resource engagements. So think about it being analogous or a graphical view of the resource engagement or capacity planning process, not the detailed resource assignments.
Okay, thank you so much, Jim.
Was there any others that were remained unanswered?
Nope, all of them have been answered.
All right, well, thank you very much for your attention today. It looks like we've taken up the full hour almost today, so I appreciate you sticking with us. And you will be getting, as Mike said, a copy of the slide deck as well as a link to this recording if you'd like to view or share this with others in your organization. So thanks again and have a great day.